Some of you may recognise this character if you're a fan of The Thick of It. This is Stuart Pearson, who is the Tory spin doctor who is never happier than when he's mantra sifting his way to a think tank thought shower. And this phrase that I've used as the title for my brief remarks is something that he once said, goodbye trope guys, hello pixelated society. And I sort of start with that because I think it speaks to a concern I know a lot of my colleagues here and across the university sector feel about the pace and speed and preponderance of different things that are happening in and around this space. That's one depiction of some of the buzzwords that we get chucked at us on a daily basis. Institutionalised, of course, in certain respects with things like the ref, but with a lot of other stuff going along around the side. So what I wanted to do, just as a sort of introductory piece, really, was say, firstly, a bit about that landscape and how I see it changing and evolving around us. Secondly, a little bit about my own use and interaction with some of these platforms and tools. And finally, just a few thoughts on sort of where this may all go next. As Ian says, I've had a slightly unusual career trajectory to sort of ending up here at Sussex. I spent over a decade working in political think tanks, a large part of which I spent at the think tank Demos, which those of you with long political memories may recall was at one point at least Tony Blair's favourite think tank. And Demos, when I arrived, was in its sort of New Labour zenith. The outgoing research director when I turned up was a guy called Perry Six, and his surname was the number 6, which we all thought was just his way of making sure he was always the first author on any joint publication. But he's now a professor at Queen Mary, incidentally, so he's a proper academic. So Perry Six was there, and everyone had intimidatingly fashionable glasses. I'd been there about 3 months, and I decided I had to catch up with the crowd, and ended up going to this sort of ferociously fashionable optician in Soho, and coming out with this pair of glasses that made me look like a poor imitation of Bono. And I got the problem is, of course, when you're short-sighted and you put glasses on, you can't see what you look like. Well, at least in those days, before they had webcams and stuff to show you. So I got that. It looked awful. Of course, I had to change them back to something more conservative. But anyway, think tanks are very, very good at thinking about the impact of their work. In many ways, they design the headline of a project before they begin the research. We may feel they go rather too far in that direction. Certainly, you're taught very early, if you're working in a political think tank, never to let the evidence get in the way of a good headline. But they are very good. And Demos, particularly when it emerged in the early 90s, was a bit of a breath of fresh air in the world of think tanks. It was very media savvy. Prior to that, sort of think tanks were places that were staffed by men smoking pipes. Suddenly you had all these sort of trendy media types running Demos. So anyway, I worked there for a long time, and then I went from Demos to the Royal Society, and so you sort of going from that very headline-led environment to the National Academy of Science, with its motto "Nullius in verba," take no one's word for it, and a huge emphasis on evidence and authority and the scientific underpinning of everything it said. And I turned up there as its new director of policy, and was sort of called in by the chief executive, my boss, who said, this place basically has been around for 350 years. Whatever you do, don't fuck it up on your watch. And that was the sort of prime directive. So impact there was rather different. But the reason they'd hired someone like me from somewhere like Demos was that they too recognised the need, as the National Academy of Science, to sharpen up their act and have greater impact in terms of their engagement with decision makers, policy makers, etc. Running through this whole period in a more serious sense, I have, in my own research and in my own academic interests, had a long-standing concern with issues of openness, transparency, accountability in the broad research enterprise. And these are just a couple of examples of projects I was involved with at Demos, doing a lot of work on science and society and public engagement back in the early part of the last decade. One of the last projects I set up at the Royal Society before I left and came here was the project that resulted in this report, Science as an Open Enterprise, which was a big contribution to debates here and internationally about open science and open data. So there's a sort of serious I guess, a sort of normative commitment on my side to the virtues of doing research in this open, engaged, dissemination-heavy way. Now I'm at SPRU. I've been here a couple of years, and of course SPRU, as a science and innovation policy research centre, the oldest and still one of the largest in Europe, has made a huge contribution over many years to a lot of the frameworks for thinking and evaluating research systems, including their broader impact. So there's a sort of body of deep, quite technical scholarship that has gone on and continues to go on at SPRU to this day in this whole area. I also, as Ian says, more recently become chair of this thing called the Campaign for Social Science, which was set up about 3 years ago to champion the value and contribution of the social sciences to the economy, to society, to public policy in terms of the evidence in policy agenda. And so in that context, I have quite a broad interest really in how the social sciences across the piece are engaging with these kind of agendas and these kind of debates. And I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. And of course, I do some research of my own when I find time. That is one way of capturing our output as researchers. I don't think it's a particularly brilliant way of doing it, as most of us who've sort of looked through the numbers involved in these things would acknowledge. But if I look at the landscape overall and sort of how fast things have moved in the last, particularly the last 5 years, I think it is really quite exciting. And of course, we've had this whole tumult of activity around open access here in the UK, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years. But I am quite taken with the broader argument that we're in the process of transitioning to a very different mode of scholarship and scholarly production that is much more plural in terms of the mode of dissemination and engagement with the wider world than the traditional paywall peer-reviewed journal model. Some of you may have seen the special issue of Nature a few months ago that took stock of all of these developments. I think it was a really good effort by Nature to kind of take the temperature, take the pulse of all of this. And there was one very interesting paper in there by this guy, Jason Preem, who is one of the most visible advocates of what's come to be known as altmetrics, this new generation of ways of measuring and tracking, often in real time, scholarly output and impact. And we're going to hear a bit more about one such system, I think, later. But just to quote a tiny bit from Jason Preem's paper, he talks about the emergence of peer review and everything through modern science, and says, now we're witnessing the transition to yet another scholarly communication system, one that will harness the technology of the web to vastly improve dissemination. What the journal did for a single formal product, the article, the web is doing for the entire breadth of scholarly output. The article was an attempt to freeze and mount some part of the scholarly process for display. The web opens the workshop windows to disseminate scholarship as it happens, erasing the artificial distinction between process and product. Now, there's a degree of breathlessness in that. You sort of want to sit him down with Evgeny Morozov for half an hour and let him sort of calm down. But at the same time, he's talking about some genuine changes that we're seeing, and certainly about a direction of travel, a potential that I think is genuinely there in the research system. And again, I get quite excited by things like this when they come out, manifestos for altmetrics, statements from within the research community about the value and benefit of new and different approaches to the dissemination of research and to the measurement of the impact of that research. I'm also very conscious of the downsides and the pitfalls and the need not to elevate certain metrics such that they become pernicious in their implementation and lead to perverse consequences. And we all know, and we can all think of many examples from a process like the REF, which have cultural consequences in terms of the community of the university, the community of scholarship, that we perhaps regret and don't like. I sat with Ian on the university's REF strategy group, and we sort of navigated through all of these difficult debates as we went along. Of course, the REF's been or the RE in its previous form has been a hugely valuable process overall in terms of improving the productivity of the UK research system. It's the reason why ministers can stand up and shout about the production of papers per pound spent ratio in the UK, which is extremely good. So I think the REF's been, the RE and the REF have been at times painful, but certainly valuable and overall positive addition to the world that we inhabit. And of course, we're seeing now, I think, the beginning of the process where the first few cycles of the RE have obviously focused on productivity with the REF and the shift, the introduction of impact. We're potentially at the beginning of a second cycle in which all of this broader dimensions, all of these broader dimensions of impact become increasingly important. I just flagged up this as one effort to try and grapple with and warn against some of the misuse of metrics. Again, some of you will have seen the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment that came out in the early part of last year. That's the declaration itself. This is a piece that I and a Sprue colleague wrote in The Guardian about this. And that was focusing on one particular problem, the inappropriate use of journal impact factors in individual level processes of evaluation, promotion decisions, hiring and firing decisions. It's very interesting. You look at the signatories of the San Francisco Declaration. It includes, all the research councils in this country, universities like our own, most of the major journals, and yet we all know what goes on. We all know when I look at the criteria for recruitment into my own school at BMEC, you see a constant recourse to crude use of journal-level impact factors. So that there are cultural systemic dangers in all of this stuff as well as opportunities. In terms of altmetrics, I don't know how many of you have come across David Colquhoun. He's now the emeritus professor of pharmacology at UCL. A fantastic character, has a great blog where he sort of rails against the misuse of scientific evidence and homeopathy and all sorts of things. But he had a real go just the other day at altmetrics in this piece, why you should ignore altmetrics and other bibliometric nightmares, which sparked a big debate in the metrics community, and there's lots of different blogs responding to this. That's worth looking into. So there's all these downsides there, but, and I underlined a but, I do think all in all, there is lots of potential and lots of positives as well, and we shouldn't, as ever, throw the baby of opportunity out with the bathwater, as it were. So that's the general scene. Just a little bit much more quickly on my own use of particular platforms and tools. And I mean, I'm not a great, user of altmetric tools. I sort of analyse them and look at them as more as a subject of interest as a science policy researcher. But there are a couple of things that I do use a lot, and I'll just mention those in order to kind of anchor some of this in my own experience of how to disseminate research. The first of these is Twitter. Of course, I'm sure many of you here use Twitter. It's not the novelty it was a couple of years ago. That's my Twitter page. I certainly find, as an academic working in the field I work, that Twitter is now an absolutely invaluable resource for both staying in touch with developments in my own field and related fields of research, new papers, new events, conferences, related articles in other media, and in having a kind of ongoing conversation with my peers, the other group of course scholars, researchers, in my case sometimes policymakers, because I work at a lot at the boundary between academia and policy, who are working in my field. It's incredibly useful. And of course you have the general feed of stuff on Twitter, and you also have the potential to use Twitter in quite sophisticated ways as a very bespoke, targeted news feed in your area. This is the feed I use a lot with the hashtag of sci policy, which is science policy, which most people working in this area use. And so, if you can't look at Twitter for a day, or you're too busy or whatever, and you just want to catch up with some of the key things that happen, that's a very good way of doing it. Also, of course, you can have your own curated lists. This is one that my friend and former Sprue colleague Alice Bell, who's very, very active on Twitter, she makes me look positively dormant in terms of her activity on Twitter, but she has a few really good lists, including ones on science policy and science communication that I and anyone else can subscribe to. So those are some of the ways. There have been lots of attempts to try and describe how to use Twitter. And of course, Twitter, like any platform, is used in lots of different ways by lots of different people. But I wanted to mention this one. It's too small to read, I think, there, but it's a very nice little blog post, in fact, that was written by a guy called Nigel Cameron, who works for a technology think tank in Washington. And he talks here about why Twitter matters, tomorrow's knowledge network. And I'll just read you again a tiny extract of what he says, because I think he captures really the essence of what Twitter is for me as a valuable tool. It's this potential that it provides for ongoing mutual curation of knowledge in domains that are relevant to scholarship and to broader impact. So just to quote a tiny bit from what's here on Nigel's blog. He says, let's be personal here. I follow 300 to 400 people, a spread across half a dozen fields of interest that attract and distract my attention. Tech, futures, policy, politics, high culture, publishing, aspects of business, finance, and arcana like Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party. Point is, I have 400 researchers, key thinkers and doers and scanners of every possible horizon who funnel their best finds and their smartest comments to me every day, all the time, and for no cost. The value added to my thinking is so immense, I find it impossible to think of reverting to other modalities of gathering intelligence and intelligent commentary. The term of art for the vast Twitter output is the fire hose, and the cap fits. Each and every day, my 400 hand-picked, diligent, smart researchers and commenters send thousands of items my way. Their fire hoses of news and ideas and assessments trained on me from the directions of my choosing. These curators include some of the leading thinkers on planet Earth, lesser mortals whose comments are as sharp as they are often amusing. Diligent scanners of literature, representative class of people whose importance is very great to the culture revolving around us. Nerds, journos, politicos, entrepreneurs, even a semi-celeb or two, etc., etc. So he's describing the way in which, and I think for academics, and I say this to, I sit next door to Andy Sterling, who's one of the, best, in terms of impact, his scholarly impact, has one of the, highest impacts in SPRU. He's a fantastic researcher, doesn't want to go near things like Twitter, and I often have this conversation, but how, Andy, can you sort of stay in touch with stuff? And of course his response is, well, I'm drowning in emails already, so what do I, how do I make space in my life for this additional stream? What I find certainly is that I massively prioritise this as a stream of valuable information to me over certainly over email, certainly over my inbox, probably to the detriment of certain administrative functions in the university. But anyway. Sorry, am I running out of time? Yeah, okay. You don't need to tell you how to use this. I'm sure lots of you use it already. But there are obviously very good guides out there. This, I think, is one of the best that's been produced by the Impact of Social Sciences blog that the LSE runs. They have a very good guide, and actually loads and loads of really useful posts on their website about not only Twitter but also blogging and other debates in and around impact. Indeed, I would hold up the group behind this blog as one of the best examples of what I'm going to move on to talk about quickly next, and that is multi-author blogs, which I think are another really, really valuable tool for academics wanting to take advantage of social media. This is Patrick Dunleavy, who sort of leads the group behind that blog. And they've just published, in more conventional output forms, a book that came out just a couple of weeks ago, The Impact of the Social Sciences, which is the sort of culmination of a 3-year project that they've been doing, funded by HEFKI. And it's a fantastic book, fantastic resource in terms of tracking economic, social, scholarly impact of the social sciences and the ways it's changing. But the thing I wanted to pull out right now from another of Patrick's arguments is about multi-author blogs, because it's something that I use myself. These are just some slides I have stolen from Patrick, which he would, I'm sure, support in the spirit of knowledge sharing that he advocates. But you see he sums up some of the problems of academia, which we won't go through: specialism, hyper-specialisation, the slow, long time lags in the production of knowledge, journals and publishers unable to adapt to digital technologies. He talks about the difference between single-author blogs and multi-author blogs, the pressure on a single author blog to constantly produce, the danger of long gaps, difficulties in terms of breadth of content. They can become quite idiosyncratic. The value of a multi-author blog: each author writes far fewer posts. I certainly write far fewer than I should for our group blog. You get a common format. It's much easier to amplify via social media, and you've got more nodes in the network disseminating the stuff from those blogs. He gives lots of examples. Warwick is one university that I think has done this really well in terms of presenting collectively its blog offering to the world, but there are many others. The one I'm involved with is called Political Science, and it's a science policy blog, surprise, surprise. And it's something that I edit together with 4 or 5 colleagues from here, from Manchester, from UCL, and from Nesta. So there's sort of 5 or 6 of us who are the core team. Some of us are much more active in blogging, others do more editing. I tend to do a lot of the editing and commissioning of posts. I was going to try and be super timely and put a new one up this morning, so when I put this up, I'll have my one at the top, but sadly more mundane things intervene. But it's a great, I mean, we're very lucky as well because we use The Guardian as a platform for publishing this, and I mean, that's another very interesting development in this space that we don't have time to talk about, but as you see something like The Guardian, now evolving at breakneck speed away from its origins as a printed newspaper to not only a website now in multiple countries and different national platforms, but then underneath the top layer of stuff that makes it into the paper or makes it into the headlines, layers and layers of much more specialist content that is designed and read by and shared by very specialist communities of academics, practitioners, whether it's their education blogs, their higher education blogs, their public services and public leaders blogs. There's a huge stable of science blogs, mostly science writers writing about science, and then a few peripheral ones like us on policy. There's a really good history of science blog as well. So you've got just layers and layers of content, and it's a brilliant way. And I think the main thing here is to say to other academics is, I mean, all of these sites, they've proliferated at such a rate, they're all crying out for content. There really is no barrier to getting your work out there. When I was at Demos, starting out sort of 15 years ago, it was a huge deal to try and kind of beg your way, into the favour of the comment editor on The Guardian to allow you to run your, piddly 700-word piece in the bottom bit of the comment pages, and of course that's completely transformed. Of course there are still challenges in getting it read and circulated, but there's far less difficulty in getting it out there. So I'm ending. These were 2 slides from an event I was at the European Commission just a few weeks ago on Science 2.0, and they put over them some of the sort of startups and services that exist. For me, when I look at all of this, I think we are at the beginning of shifts that I hope fulfil their potential in terms of both improving the scholarly enterprise in various ways and making it more engaged with the wider world. I was going to talk about an example of a particular project, but I've run out of time and I don't want to go on, but maybe in questions I will. Great, thank you.